Welcome everyone. I'm Councillor Susie Horton. I'm the Cabinet Member for Children, Families and Education. Just a few housekeeping things. Public seating has been made available and the meeting will also be webcast to allow the public to view remotely if they so wish. Public seating area is not in view of the camera. Safety information. We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if it does sound, please evacuate the room and the public gallery by the stairwells, don't use the lifts, and assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust's fire marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the reception desk should sign out at the end of the meeting. Back to the live streaming, everyone who speaks will be on camera. Members of the press and public are permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly they don't want to be recorded. Please can everyone use the microphones? Remember to switch them off when they have finished. And I'm just going to start off with introductions. So, Terry, if you start off.
Thank you very much. Councillor Terry Norton, and I'm the Conservative spokesperson.
Welcome.
Morning, I'm Katie Wilcox, one of the service leads within Early Help and Prevention.
Welcome, Katie.
Sarah Daly, Director of Children and Families.
Angela Mann, Finance Manager for Children, Families and Education.
Alison Edgerton, Group Accountant for Children, Families and Education.
Mike Soman, Deputy Director, Education.
James Harris, Senior Local Democracy Officer.
Welcome everyone, thank you. So we'll go on to the agenda. There have been no apologies, I don't think, received for absence, none to me and none over there, and there's no deputation requests. And
no deputation requests, no apologies, Chair, but probably a declaration of sorts, if that's okay. And it's just to say that, not an official declaration, but just for transparency, I am the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. So on item number 5, I probably will speak on it.
Yeah.
But as it's, I'm not the decision maker and it's only for information only, I don't think there's too much to say, but just for transparency.
it's really nice to have you here, Terry, on that particular one, and thanks for, I think it's best to be safe than sorry on these things. So, thank you. So you've happily covered off item 2. Item 3, straight to the first report, which is the Dedicated Schools Grant 2022-2023 Quarter 1 Budget Monitoring and Revised Budget. There you go.
Thank you. This is a regular report providing an update on the position of the Dedicated Schools Grant as at the end of Quarter 1 of the 22-23 financial year and proposals to revise the 22-23 Dedicated Schools Grant budget. The forecast position as at the end of June 22 is an underspend of £340,500, and this relates to the planned underspend on the Growth Fund, which will be carried forward at year-end to support the committed expenditure to schools in 23-24. As in previous years, the end of the first quarter falls partway through the summer term, and the class lists for both the high needs and early years placements are not normally received until the end of the summer term. Therefore, both the SEND and the early years budgets are forecast to be on budget. The table in section 7 sets out the forecast position regarding the Dedicated Schools Grant balance, the agreed commitments and the proposed use of any uncommitted balances. It also sets out proposals requesting the delegated authority for the section 151 officer or their representative to adjust the early years budget in line with the early years block allocation adjustments that are received in July every year from the Department for Education. It also requests approval to provide the Wimmering School with a grant to support the school through the first term of opening when it was forecast to only be 50% full. Section 8 sets out the proposed budget revisions for the 22-23 financial year, the details of which are set out in the report, including the proposed use of the carry-forward balance to support the changes. Part of the report is for noting, which is the forecast year-end position as at the end of June 22, and it requests approval for the the delegation to the Section 151 officer or their delegated representative for the responsibility to adjust the early years block budget in line with the DSG allocation annually in July. Approve the proposed pre-opening grant to the Wimmering Free School of £250,000 and approve the revisions to the 22-23 budget as set out in Appendix 1 and Section 8. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for that report. Just before I go to any comments or questions, just from my perspective, we have this every year around the timelines with the early years and the send information for updating. So I think that's quite straightforward. We've been there before. And just to say on the Wimmering decision, we've got again, a timelines thing. We've managed to get our decision-making meetings in the right order with the Schools Forum. So I am an observer at Schools Forum and heard that there was support for that very sensible use of that money, and I think probably on the back of that it's probably worth saying that you know how valued that will be in the city by schools, and therefore they're very willing to support that decision. Okay, are there any questions or comments from either officers or Councillor Norton on that?
Just to share my support for the 250k for the Wimmering Special School, given the current climate, it's reassuring that that's been able to be allocated, so support from me.
Thank you so much. Hi, do you want to introduce yourself? Or do you want a couple of minutes? You right? Over to you.
I'm Tom Coles. I'm a Labour representative. I represent Fratton Ward.
Welcome, Tom. We've just done the first report. I don't know whether you had, and I know you weren't here for the presentation of it, but I don't know if you had any comments on that. Okay, thank you. In which case, the noting bit, noting the forecast year-end budget position of the DSG, but also approve the delegation to the Section 151 officer or their delegated representatives the responsibility to adjust the early years block budget in line with the DSG allocation adjustments annually in July. Also approve the proposed pre-opening grant to the Wimmering Free School of £250,000 as set out in paragraph 7.8. And also approve the revisions to the 22-23 budget as set out in Appendix 1 and Section 8. Okay, thank you everyone. We now go on to item, what is item 4, which is Children, Families and Education Portfolio Budget Monitoring Report for the first quarter 2022-2023. I'm going over to Angela, aren't I?
Thank you. So this report covers the rest of the budgets in the portfolio, and overall there's a budget pressure of 1.9 million. Just over 1 million of that is in relation to COVID, and 0.8 million is due to non-COVID reasons. The pressures and their explanations are detailed in the report, but just a quick summary. There's £600,000 of pressure in home to school transport. That's partly due to cost of living pressures. 0.6 million in the family safeguarding, and that's partly COVID because of the additional staffing that's required. And there's also some placement pressures due to a small number of exceptionally high cost placements. There's 0.9 million pressure on placements for looked after children as well. We have pressure on energy costs, staffing pressures in homes and in the fostering service, and we also have a £400,000 pressure on Indigenous care leavers. These are partly offset by underspends elsewhere. There's £200,000 underspend in the budget for under 18 asylum seeking children, where there's greater numbers than what we budgeted for, and the grant is in excess of our direct costs for the under 18s. And we also have an underspend at the moment of 0.8 million on asylum seeking care leavers. some high-cost placements are forecast to reduce in that area, but it is worth noting that the grant for that area doesn't cover the costs, and council cash limit does support the costs for those care leavers. In terms of the capital projections, they're detailed in the report, but at the moment we're projecting to be on budget for that. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for that. Again, a few comments from me up front. I mean, COVID, which seems to be segueing to a cost of living, those two things, no surprise that there's pressures on children and families, and education, with schools having to deal with all those pressures as well. So I think that there's no clear delineation about the impact of those and where one's gone into the other. We've kind of got a double whammy. So I think all of the things listed here are really understandable. Of course, with the home to school transport, we thought we were getting somewhere, and then the costs go up, as well as the demand. So there's some thinking to be done around that, and we know that this is an issue across the whole country as well. Then two more points I want to make. One is about the family safeguarding. It's no surprise that because of those things, that the pressure on family safeguarding, it's a shame, because I actually think we were seeing some really positive movements towards that family safeguarding model actually having an impact. And it's very difficult to tease out what would have happened if there hadn't have been these other issues coming in. But we are where we are, and we're not complacent about those overspends, and constantly thinking creatively around how we can manage them. And my final point is the capital one is a good news story in some ways, but it has been a result of sort of de-scoping some things and shifting money around and managing within the envelope. So I think it's worth noting that some things won't have happened, which would have been beneficial if that money had still had the same value as it had done when we started planning. Okay, so that's my comments to start off. I don't know whether anyone has any questions for any of the officers or comments.
I'm happy to ask some questions if that's okay. Yeah, so felt like we were getting somewhere with homeschool transport, especially considering it's probably one of the only areas that during COVID actually saved some money, and it's gone back to the kind of same old, hasn't it, of being quite expensive and what have you. I guess I've asked this question before. It's that age-old issue, isn't it, with homeschool transport? What are we looking at in terms of alternative? Have we explored avenues for a more cost-effective way of providing that service? And that probably links into the same question for the high costs, and they are extortionately high costs for the placements, aren't they? What are we doing in terms of looking at shared practice and trying to keep those costs down? What pieces of work have been undertaken to look at cheap alternatives?
I think Mike can pick up the home to school transport one.
Yeah, on home to school transport, and just to reinforce what Councillor Horton said about the reason for those increased costs, and that's partly due to demand, increased numbers we're seeing, and then also obviously the fuel costs and the rise in those costs. So those are the two main factors. In terms of what we're doing to try and mitigate that, so there are a range of things we are doing. So we're looking at the routes themselves and how we can be more efficient and how we can manage that, as well as trying to broaden the market, although that's been difficult in terms of the providers that are out there, which is very limited. We're also having a review to see, can we do things differently? So, for example, we're having another look at whether we can do some of this internally through our own resources, through our own transport, and is that a more viable way of doing things? We've had a look at that in the past and concluded it wasn't, but these are different times now, so we're going to have another look at that. And then there are other things around the margins. It won't make a huge impact. So, for example, we're going to relook at independent travel training where that's appropriate, which is good for those children in terms of for their future lives. It won't make a huge difference to the cost, but it will make some difference. So we're having a look at that as well. So, we're not going to leave any stone unturned. But I have to be honest with you, I can't see that overspend coming down significantly in the short term. But we are doing everything we can to try and bring that cost down.
Can I come back on that?
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
So for me, it's just understanding the demand. So, and forgive me if I'm being naive here, are we talking about, we've spoken about this before, Portsmouth is a relatively flat island city where you can get anywhere within a fairly short amount of time. Is the demand for the service due to criteria? Are in most cases this severely disabled children who absolutely need that, or do we feel that the process to apply for homeschool transport is perhaps a little bit looser than we might want, with parents opting to use it rather than a real necessity?
Yeah, we could always look at again the policy, but we've done that a number of times over the years. There are strict criteria, and the children, young people that we provide homeschool transport for are those the complex SEND and meet those criteria. We do have a discretionary element to it, and so we will provide transport where possible. For example, if you have some space on a particular route, then we'll try and manage that and offer that out. There's a charge, but we do offer those sort of possibilities. And of course, there's also, although it's very limited, where we can't provide a school place for a child within 2 miles within 2 miles of secondary, 3 miles of primary, then we pay for those costs as well. But that's very small numbers. Yeah.
I know that. There are some good examples. Park Community, for instance, in Lee Park, I think the head teacher drives the school minibus around, but I think that's less for children with disabilities, more to get kids into school. So if there's an element of that, I don't know if there's something that we can do in-house with schools where they do some pickups to really get kids there. I don't know. I'm just thinking quite loosely and outside the box. In terms of the high-cost placements, same again. So we're doing all we can to have a look at the cost of those placements and.
I'll
let Sarah come
in and respond to that. So you will be aware that there is a national crisis in terms of placements, and I think it's worth reflecting that 2 years ago we would be calling a high-cost placement a placement that cost £7,000 a week, which was high cost, and we're now talking between 30 and 60,000. There are authorities in the area who are currently paying £60,000 a week to support children with significantly complex needs, and I think this is around the national crisis of lack of appropriate placements and settings. We know that children who are needing secure accommodation, I think in the past week there's been 34 children waiting for one bed. So we are talking about children with exceptional needs, and because of that we're having to set up bespoke packages with 3 carers to 1 child. So we're not talking about placements, we're talking about specific kind of wraparounds for the children. We are lobbying and looking at what we can do nationally, so the Care Review will pick that up, obviously, in terms of those proposals made by Josh McAllister's report. We, as a local authority, are working with several other local authorities in the South East to look at a proposal that would work with a provider to look at wrapping around some of those more complex children with a specific focus on young adolescents, concerns around exploitation, concerns around that edge of criminality or indeed criminal behaviour, and to look at how we might respond better to them, keep them closer to home, and wrap around that trauma-informed approach. So we are working proactively. Unfortunately, those pieces of work take slightly longer, but we are also looking very creatively at those packages for those children, because actually some of those bespoke packages we would be better spending a smaller amount of money to look at how we could effectively keep those children at home with the support of the partnership, again, wrapping round. So, yeah, a lot of work going on in the background.
And if there's anything that we can, 60k is of course extortionate, if there's anything that we can do in partnership to lobby.
Look at the email I forwarded you.
Yep. And look what interministers, it's clearly a piece of work that...
We will take you up on your kind offer. And we know that, that it's not a never-ending pot that you have, but absolutely we would love to take up on that offer, and I have forwarded you something, because after our conversation the other day, I went straight to Mike and asked him if he had any ideas, and he did. So
great.
There's an email in your inbox.
and maybe outside of policing, more lobbying into ministers, joint piece of work, shadow ministers, whatever we can do to really push the case, if it's that.
Yeah.
or next year, or whenever. But anyway, we'll get to that. And then last but not least for me, if that's okay, care leavers for those seeking asylum. Is it the age issue? Is that right? Am I right in thinking that we have a duty of care up until quite an old age?
Yeah. Sorry.
So the duty of care was extended from up to 21 to up to 25. There's some flexibility within that offer, but clearly a number of those care experienced young people have suffered significant trauma, and whilst they may stabilise, their needs do bubble and they will come back and access support from us. Within our cohort of care experienced young people, you will be well aware we have a larger number of those children who are awaiting asylum outcomes than many other authorities at this time, because we had larger numbers coming through our port. Those children are reliant on us. They don't have any access to public funds until they get their outcome decision from the Home Office, and we are aware that there are some significant delays. We had a young person who turned 25 who hadn't had his outcome. Obviously, in terms of financial impact on the local authority, that's significant, but also in terms of the emotional well-being for those young people, it means that they don't have that sense of stability, and anxiety levels are high. Therefore, costs are higher because of placement need and the needs of those young people. So again, a bit of a vicious cycle, but we, again, are working across the DCS group to kind of lobby again with the Home Office to look at what other routes there might be to speed up some of those decisions.
And to shout it out, where the Home Office asks us what we're doing in terms of one-day slavery, our response is often, what are you doing to speed up applications, which are probably the single barrier. Okay.
Absolutely.
Tom, are you going to come in? Or?
Yeah. Thank you, Terry.
You covered everything I wanted to raise.
Thanks very much.
One more thing, if that's
Yeah.
okay. Sorry, I had 4 or 5 points on there.
That's right.
So in what looks to be a difficult time ahead, is there any early indication of if and where cuts might need to be made? And if so, where are we looking?
We're having these conversations at the moment.
I mean, obviously, we review every penny we spend, and I think that the concern that we have is, as Susie has named at the beginning of this item, the long tail of COVID is still very much with us in children's services and in education. We see the trauma of children's experiences every day in school, but also within our children's services systems, and we see our looked after children's numbers increasing quite significantly in recent months as a kind of result of that. And as we say, we are not through that long tail, and here comes a cost of living crisis in a city where we know we have significant pockets of deprivation across the board, and that inequality that is already well with us. So we are concerned about our capacity to maintain as we currently are, knowing the pressures we have already within our system, but we are reviewing everything we do, and we are working with other authorities, as you can hear with the complex kind of child in care challenge, to look at what we might do differently, what we might streamline.
Thank you.
Which is why I guess it was crucial to get teachers back to work quickly during the pandemic, but that's probably a political dig for Tom's group, but there you go.
On that note, thank you very much for that report, and thanks for the questions. They're really good questions, and it gives us an opportunity both to be challenged, but also to have a further opportunity to explain the challenges that we're facing day in, day out, and looking at what we can do, scrutinising every penny, but never putting children in unnecessary risky situations, and it is a difficult one. But no, do appreciate that. So wrapping that up, it's recommended that I note the Children and Families Education Portfolio forecast revenue and capital budget positions as at the end of June 2022, together with the variance and pressure explanations, and in consultation with directors develop a savings plan which will eliminate the overspend currently being forecast, progress against which is monitored by me and the Director of Finance on a regular basis. Okay, and actually it's probably a good point in which to come to the third item, which I requested to come here, because so much in this in these decision-making meetings around these budget papers, we go back over them, and I think it's fair to say over the years that I've been doing this, there are some common themes. And I suppose my concern is, as things are really, people talk about cut to the bone and like really cut to the bone, is that for me, the way that there's always hope in coming out of this is to not only deal with the crisis situations or children needing immediate support and their families, but also to invest in that early help and that trying to interrupt the patterns and the systems in order that the future could be rosier and And it's the right thing to do, not just to deal with a crisis situation, but to do preventative stuff. So I asked for this paper to come after a visit that I went on, and I'm going to hand over to Katie to present the report about the inclusion of police community support officers in early help and prevention. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you. So, my name is Katie Wilcox. I am a service lead in the Early Help and Prevention Service. Can I firstly say a big thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and talk about a service that I'm incredibly proud to work in. I was also proud recently to be able to show Councillor Susie Horton and our Director Sarah Daly around one of our family hubs, which was in Paulsgrove. It was a really lovely visit. We were able to have a conversation about the service, and this was where the request, as you said, was made for the report. In this report, I have given an overview of our service with a particular focus of the introduction of the police community support officers. I'm hoping to summarise this for you today in about 10 minutes, so I hope that's okay. I'm aware that you've already seen the report, so please tell me if I am going into too much detail or talking too fast, as I have a tendency to do that when I feel quite passionate about something. So who are we? The Early Help and Prevention Service is for families with children that are aged between 0 to 19. So the service is provided both by Portsmouth City Council and by Solent NHS. So Solent NHS will lead on the health visiting service, family nurse partnership, school nurses, for example, whereas PCC lead on the over 5 section within this. So we have within the over 5 area the parenting service and the children with disabilities service, both of which I have summarised some information about that within the report, and I'm happy to provide further information if needed outside of this meeting. But I'd also like to mention that we have the young carers and the LGBTQ plus team, both of which offer a one-to-one and detailed group provision that I'm also very proud of. The report today, though, focuses on our targeted support offer for families that have needs that meet a Tier 3 threshold. The Portsmouth threshold document has been included as part of this report, and it should give you some examples of what families that meet that threshold may look like to us, what challenges that they may be facing. So we have 2 ways that we will receive a referral into our service. The main way is through the multi-agency safeguarding hub, and that can be self-referrals, referrals from professionals for families. And if the multi-agency safeguarding hub, you may have heard it referred to as MASH, determine that this is a Tier 3 need, then it will come through to our service. In addition to that, if a family's already been working with our family support and safeguarding teams, and they have an ongoing need and a plan that needs to continue to be worked, then those teams will pass that across to us to continue working that family plan. At that point, we will allocate a lead professional, a key worker, if you like, that will take a lead in supporting that family. They will complete an assessment for the family that looks at everything that is going on for them, and the end result should be a family plan that's produced with the family and any relevant professionals that are working alongside them. If all the children are under age of 5, then that lead professional will be a health visitor. If there are some children over 5, then they will be allocated within our service. Our service has family support workers and specialist family support workers, and their specialisms include exploitation, child mental health, housing, substances, to name but a few. And these specialist family support workers, they work with families, but they are also expected to offer support to all of our staff, and that offer is called Team Around the Worker. We feel our specialisms reflect the needs for our city, and really this is the basis for the introduction of the police community support officers that I may refer to as a PCSO within the report. So the report details the partnership working with the youth offending team that in part really helped to increase our awareness on the young people that are becoming first-time entrants into our criminal justice system. We also saw a real increase in the number of children being exploited within Portsmouth, both sexual and criminal exploitation. In 2021, there were 246 children that we had identified at risk. In response to this, Portsmouth City Council and Hampshire Constabulary signed a memorandum of understanding, a working agreement, if you like, that enabled us to second a PCSO over to our service. They were given a really comprehensive training schedule that I think really helped them understand how to better work with families. And they began to carry out one-to-one sessions with young people in Portsmouth that may have committed antisocial behaviour, criminal damage. We may be worried that they're starting to carry a knife, a weapon, for example. So they were able to tailor what they were doing to meet the needs of that individual child. So after about 9 months, we were able to evidence that this was already having a really positive impact on our service. What we saw was an increased knowledge in our team, an increased use of all tools and resources by all of our staff. We had improved links with the police and other services, and we could start to see some really good outcomes for the one-to-one intensive work that we were doing with the young people. So we presented this information, and as a result we were able to have a second PCSO join our service, and the secondment was extended till May 2023, which is really good news. So in the report I discussed 2 main tools that the PCSO is currently using. It's something I refer to as the RASBO, which is the Reducing Antisocial Behaviour or Offending Screening Tool, and the SERAF, which is a Child Exploitation Risk Assessment Framework. And I'm quite pleased that I actually managed that without having it written down there, just the abbreviation. So these are used to identify what work the children would really benefit from the PCSO. Also, when we have a child that is at a higher risk of exploitation, the police identify a single point of contact within the police, which I refer to as a SPOC. So our PCSO was able to really help build that relationship between the young person in our service and their single point of contact within the police. So what we're seeing now is that the PCSOs are carrying out their one-to-one work with young children. They're offering the team around the worker support to our staff. They are offending champions that attend regular support sessions held by our youth offending team to make sure their knowledge around tools they're using is up to date. They have informed us all about community partnership information forms, so as a service we have become much better and efficient at using those CPIs to make sure the police are informed about the local community. They have put together training for all our staff, new staff, and for new social workers that are coming into this profession within our academy. And they will attend all relevant police meetings so that we can keep it informed as to what's going on. So our recording system was adapted in June to enable us to start capturing better what intervention was taking place. So from that point, we were able to see that 36 children have been supported through the team around the worker offer, where advice to their lead professional has been given. 33, at the point of me looking when I did this report, had the intensive one-to-one support in place. And 32 advice sessions had been carried out with their police colleagues. So this brings me to the final part of the report, which is the so what. So what are the impact that we're starting to see? What is happening for those children's lives? So I looked at the first 8 children that the PCSO worked with when they first came into our service. Only one of those children has needed a further intervention from Children's Social Care or Early Help and Prevention. 7 have not been re-referred, and on all of those, at that time when we worked with them, were at risk of exploitation. 6 are now not at any risk, and 1 has reduced to low. I looked at a further 14 children that we've worked with more recently. 8 are still open to us, the intervention is ongoing, but in all of those, the exploitation risk has reduced to either no longer present or low. The other 6 children are closed to the service, but at the moment no further concerns have been reported and they are not at risk of exploitation. I acknowledge that this is early days, but you can see that it's a good start from the work that we're doing. So I brought a case study as requested, which was also included as part of this report. It's one of the first 8 children that the PCSO worked with. So if it's okay with you, I was just going to summarise that case study before I finish. Okay, so this was a 12-year-old white male that was in Portsmouth, and this young person came to our attention because they had assaulted their mother, and a a referral came through to us from the police. When we carried out our assessment, we were able to see that there were other concerns going on for this young person. They were already known to be carrying out antisocial behaviour in the community. They were throwing rocks at cars and people's vehicles. They were suspected of thieving from local shops, and their mum had said they had stolen from them. They were spending time with people that we knew were unsafe people for them to be spending time with, and they had already started experimenting with fire setting within their home environment. So this young person had a lead professional that was working with the family as a whole, but the PCSO came on board alongside to carry out some intensive one-to-one sessions with the young person. What they did was use the RASBO to look at what was going on and come up with ideas of what would be really good one-to-one sessions. They did the safety mapping, which is a tool to aid conversation about what areas in Portsmouth do you feel safe in, who are you hanging around with, where do you fit, what does Portsmouth look like for you? They were able to carry out something that was called a consequential chain, which is really unpicking the behaviour that the young person was doing and helping them to understand the impact on themselves, the victim, and also of the wider community. They carried out some fire safety planning, and then Hampshire Fire Service took over with further one-to-one sessions, including a visit to the home, making sure that adequate fire alarms and safety equipment was in place. We also did some sessions that are called Up to You sessions. These are looking at a young person's behaviour and revisiting it and seeing if there is a different way they could have managed that situation, and almost repeating that to understand a better way forward. So those are just some of the things that took place with that young person. What we then saw as a result of that is the relationship between that young person and their parent significantly improved. We didn't have any further reports of child-to-parent violence in that situation. We saw the young person's attendance at school increasing. We saw that they stopped hanging around with the young people that we were worried about, which reduced that risk. And they started to really show an understanding of what might happen to them if they carried on with the behaviours. This is one of the young people that, as yet, we have not had any further involvement with. So I hope that gives, I hope in some way our intervention has helped this young person achieve a better outcome. And I was also asked to consider what may have happened if we hadn't have carried out this work with this young person. And of course, I can't be absolutely accurate with you, but I have worked with many young children like this young person, and I didn't get the opportunity to work with them when they were 12 years old, or to put in the support that we're able to put the support in now. And what I would predict that you might see is a young person whose relationship deteriorated further with their family, became a child that with all the support that we're putting in, still we weren't able to repair that relationship. They became a looked after child. Their exploitation risks went through the roof because they're being pushed towards a friendship group that for them is completely unsafe. And they would be entering into the criminal justice system with a criminal record before they were even 13 years old. And I think Mike would probably agree they would not be attending school. So I know that seems like a very dire picture, but we've seen it in so many of our young people. So I predict that if we hadn't got in there to do that work, then that may have been the outcome for this young person.
Thank you so much. That was such a rich and detailed report, and quite rightly so, because as I said before, so often we have reports here which about the money, and of course that is related to the money. So for our finance colleagues here, actually those are the individual stories behind the numbers that we're crunching and we're worried about. Just a couple of things. I think you covered more or less what I was going to say, but there's no doubt about it. That's intensive resources, isn't it? I mean, that is, it is a lot of time by a lot of people to wrap around that family. But is it worth it? Yes, of course it is, if it changes someone's life like that. I think we all probably all agree in this room it's all about relationships, and it's about how we can use limited resources to target, because we have to make choices. You can't have that for every single person, and actually how do we how do we change that culture by investing in those relationships. The bit I was going to point out, you covered it for me, which is trying to prove something that hasn't happened. I mean, I know you have outcomes, and I know we have KPIs, and we know we have all sorts of data that we crunch to justify the investment in some of these things. But in actual fact, it's very difficult to say what would have happened, and yet we know it in our hearts, don't we? So thanks for covering that off, and thank you for including the case study, because I really, when I first read the report, I just wanted, what does that look like? What does that look like for someone? And that, you know, you almost feel like you know that young person, and you know that their outcomes and their future is on a better footing as a result of that investment and that work by that really valued role there. So thank you so much. It was really, really lovely, informative report that takes us back to what we're really doing day in, day out. So thank you, Katie. I'm sure that Terry has got stuff to say, so I'm going to go straight to him.
Right. Where do I start? And I'll try to just pick off some points if that's okay, and kind of merge questions, comments in together if that's okay, members. So absolutely, I mean, the work that's being done there is clearly really, really useful, and the results speak for themselves. Susie, I think you make some clear points around how do we prevent crime when you don't know it's not happened. But for me, it's those indicators, and I'm so pleased that there's talk around ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and that trauma-informed practice, because so many criminals, I think, today didn't have that. There wasn't a talk around trauma-informed practice when they were younger. Nobody gripped their ACEs, and therefore that it led to that. And I guess, you know, although we can't, they're indicators, aren't they? You know, and you have that. We have that in the drugs world, don't we? You'll rarely meet a heroin addict that didn't start off smoking marijuana. So there are some indicators there that if you can grip, and certainly around ACEs, it goes a long way. I guess the question for me, it's difficult. So Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, 2 million people, 600,000 of them are young people. So of course, lots has to be done around that prevention work. But the question for me is, if I look at some of these things that you're looking at, behaviour changes. Is one of them. Have you found in any areas that schools are actually pushing back on the support? There is, I think, across the board an inconsistency. Some schools are still so fixated on league tables and ABCs and literacy and all of those results-based things that actually they close the door on additional services. They close the door on police officers. And I had this big thing around the police force being present in school. I think it's one of the only areas which is really missing from school. In school, you can still speak to a nurse, you can still speak to a careers advisor, you can still kind of speak to social services through the school channels, but policing is sometimes an area that certainly academies don't want to kind of welcome. Are you finding that there's a bit of a barrier getting into schools? I still think teachers are probably the best placed to identify children in front of them who are, who are malnourished or overly sexualised or engaging in gang culture and all of those sort of things. Do we feel that schools are making referrals and working with you, or are there still some spaces where schools are not responding as well as we might want them to?
I don't mind. I'll come to you in a minute, Michael.
Right?
I just want to jump in there briefly because, yeah, I absolutely appreciate the tension. But, I mean, the challenge for schools is I just feel so sorry for them. The pressure is on outcomes and league tables. We know that. And actually, for most schools, the most important things are the relationships, and if they had the freedom to focus on that solely, I think we'd see a different picture. But that's you and I on the same page, both having got out of the classroom. So,
okay.
So the second thing I would say is on the police stuff. I think, and Mike will be able to confirm this, we did do a piece earlier on in the year to schools around making sure that schools knew who the links were with the police, and that's been refreshed. But I think it's fair to say that we could do some more on that, because I absolutely agree with you, and I come from the days of, I can remember when I was in school and it was PC Pauline, everyone knew PC Pauline, and that personal relationship with them. On the third one, I think, and Sarah will be able to clarify this, is I think schools still reliably what's the word I want, pass on that information either through the MASH or through close working relationships. So I'll hand over, Mike, can you say anything more about the police?
Well, yeah, I mean, just to reassure Terry, actually, in fact, I'd say it's almost the opposite. The schools are looking for greater engagement with the police, and we've been working quite hard to improve those communications. And as Susie said, we've refreshed the details about the PCSOs that are linked to schools, and so all schools know who that officer is. I mean, there is a bit of churn, so it does change, and we need to regularly update it. But that relationship has certainly improved. But schools still say to me, you know, we want greater levels of engagement, particularly in secondary. And although, yes, schools are worried about performance tables and so forth, actually, you know, for the majority of our schools, incredibly inclusive, and actually it's what matters for the child that comes first rather than performance tables, if I'm honest. Yeah.
That's reassuring, thank you.
I'll just come in around the referrals. We have a really good standard of referral that comes through from our schools in the city. An awful lot of work has been done through the Partnership Learning and Development team to support schools to understand what does a good referral look like that means the right information is coming through so the MASH can make the right decision. Alongside that, we've got the link coordinator roles, so those were the roles developed as part of the pandemic to keep in touch with schools and to keep in touch with those vulnerable children and families. So those roles are now embedded as business as usual, and they're enabling really good early identification of children with additional needs or some level of complexity within the family. And in addition to that, we've also more recently, because there is an awful lot of demand on the front door and we want to get this right, we've started to involve more conversations. So if schools are worried, they can pick up the phone, they can have a conversation with the MASH, they can talk that through, and between us we can make out the decision about what the right thing to do is at that point. So I think we've got some really strong, effective systems and some really good positive communication. And the other indicator for that is I get very, very few complaints or concerns flagged to me from schools or head teachers about social care systems. And that's a first, I have to say, in terms of local authorities I've worked in. So I think those relationships are strong and people know who to talk to.
Brilliant. Yeah,
Thank you.
Great. Can I come back? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I know slightly off of this, I've asked for schools liaison officers to return. I know that the force have found funding for 6 to start with, so those schools liaison officers will return, and that's a good thing. And actually, when we speak to the force around their child-centred policing approach, it is quite comprehensive. I think where we can all work together, and probably in terms of cross departments or cross portfolios probably, is there's some work around where children feel safe and some work around where they feel that they belong. And I think it's great that the ICS, the ICB are starting, you know, they've got 5 priorities. One of them's prevention, one of them's young people. You know, mental health, of course, young people's mental health in terms of one of the biggest generational problems we face are in there. Data sharing is one of those. So it feels like the health partners are taking a much more a positive approach to working with each other. But in terms of where those young people belong, I think maybe is there potentially some work to be done there across portfolio? I know that, you know, I've sat in planning meetings before where we've had a burger bar's come up and there's outrage because they say a burger bar is too close to a school, we should never have a burger bar close, we need to think about healthy eating. What we ignore when those decisions come in is, well, where else do children belong? You know, they go to the parks, they're moved on because they're congregating, there's spikes outside shops, there's signs on the door saying 1 child at a time, then they spend time in their bedrooms on the internet, and we say they don't really engage in society very much, and their mental health's been affected by the internet. So is there some work to be done to really look at creating environment spaces where young people do feel they belong, lighting parks? I don't know, it's not within education exactly, it's cross-portfolio, isn't it? But if there's some work to be done there to look at spaces for young people, that'd be great.
Yes and yes. Just I'll kick off and then I'll hand over to Sarah. So way before the Youth Investment Fund was even mentioned, I've been doing a piece of strategic work around the umbrella thing around young people. Given austerity, given the pressures on the portfolios, given the fact that we're both responding to and also trying to prevent and get in early doors, actually, is there anything we could do strategically to make the most of those connections, even if the pots of money aren't there? Yeah. So we'd already started that around what is youth provision, but also you're absolutely right around breaking down silo working. So working closer, with, as you say, there's a kind of synergy there with health, which has been there, I think has been well established for a long time. And I'll trot out my normal thing, which is I realise how lucky we were, or how many opportunities came out of having a coterminous CCG with a city with local authority, because when I went to other places I realised how that afforded us so many easier joint opportunities. Those are well established, but actually, what do we do about youth services in the broader sense? There's a piece of work that's been going on around that and looking at different portfolios stroke directorates around that. Then of course the youth investment funders come in, so we've worked up a bit on that. I'll hand over to Sarah to pick up. Have I covered everything?
Fantastic. You do me out of a job, Susie. No, I do wonder whether Sam might want to come in to talk just a little bit about the adolescent and young adult worker that we've developed a new head of service and some of the work that she's doing in the city as well, just with that top tier.
Hello there. As Sarah says, absolute priority for us at the minute is to develop our work around our adolescents, and actually there's a real commitment across the whole partnership about how we do that. Working with, I guess, the more traditional safeguarding agencies, but also really looking at how we focus on place, not individual children, but the place and the context around them, and how we can maybe disrupt in a way or focus it in a more positive way, but actually make places safer, really think about what are the issues that can enable the riskier situations to happen. So it really is about moving beyond individual children to the context and to places, and to think about our whole community and working with, I think, partners that we haven't done before, to really think what can we do. And we've had a consultant coming in and working with us. He does a lot of work with the British Transport Police, actually. He continues to do that. And that's been really insightful for us in thinking what's possible, what can we do differently. And we're at the point of really mobilising that work over the coming months, really piloting, seeing how it works. And actually, I think we're really quite excited about doing things differently. And I think what's been really good to see is the commitment. Many people stepping forward, and it is about engaging communities. And I think looking, we know, you've obviously picked up on school, we know about children are safe in school, but actually what can we do out of school so that there are activities, opportunities, safe places, who can deliver that, really engaging with our third sector. And I think it's, she's happy to come and talk to anybody about the work and actually think about what else, because certainly what we know is many of our members have such strong links into the communities, is actually how can we utilise that as well and really think about how we can make Portsmouth the safest place that it can be for our young people. But police absolutely have been a key partner for us in that.
Thank you, Sam. More?
Just to say, of course, there are various different things. We've got an antisocial behaviour pot. You could speak to your colleagues around around lighting for parks and things like that. So there are lots of things that we can do, I guess, from different avenues to work together. The one thing I will say is I sit on the Health and Wellbeing Board for all three of the main ones in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and I'm so pleased that they are writing a joint letter to CAMS to say to ask the ICS, to make young people's mental health a priority. So that's, I know that you sit on the Portsmouth one, so that's great, and hopefully that will go a long way again as a health being a partner, bringing them in to work together. But thank you.
Yeah, really value your comments on this. It's really good to have this conversation. Tom, anything to say?
I covered most of it there, thanks. I was just going to say about does neurodiversity get taken into as a factor as well? Because I know from personal experience with my ADHD that they have a tendency to go down the path of crime and drugs and all sorts. It's very easy to go down that way. So is that a risk factor that you guys take into account?
Yes, absolutely. And there probably isn't the time to talk about all the work that's going on at the moment in relation to neurodiversity, and also around how just looking at that speech and language development at such an early age is actually a really key indicator for a lot of our young people. So all I can do is reassure you that it's a key part of everything that we're doing, and we are very lucky within our service to have specialists for our children with disabilities that really focus on those areas, and we're part of the ongoing work around the neurodiversity.
Yeah, I'll come and see you at some point.
Thank you, everyone. That was...
Sorry once again on that again, an absolute plea then, wherever we can. I know it's difficult with academies and what have you. Oracy in schools is crucial, and wherever we can push oracy, as well as numeracy and literacy, those language skills for employability, all that sort of stuff, it'd be great to see programs that really place that non-kind of measurable thing in schools, because
this is
it's
key.
so important.
This is a cue for Mike to
just,
come in.
Again, that's in terms of the sort of priorities under the Portsmouth Education Partnership. We've got 4 top ones, and literacy and oracy in particular is one of the main ones. And with the Portsmouth Education Investment Area, which we are now one of, we've just submitted our priorities to the DFE and got the green light to proceed with those priorities, and that includes early language, oracy, literacy, etc. So a lot of work over the next 3 years will be going on that, building on what we've already achieved. Yeah.
Excellent. That was really invigorating dialogue and conversation. Thank you, Katie. Look what you've done. So, no, thank you. And that was just a report for noting, but I think it is really, it gives us an opportunity, doesn't it, to look at how all of this stuff is so interconnected and not just around, budget lines. It's people's lives and people. Of course, the money is so important. Angela's looking at me. We know how important it is, but we've got to keep focusing on the fact that it is the relationships and it's the day-to-day stuff that not only makes the difference, but it's what we're meant to be doing anyway. So thank you, everyone. That was really good. And I think that brings me to the end of the meeting. So thank you. Thank you, James.